Tribe studio. This week we got both Luca and Mike in studio. And today's special guest, we're very happy to have both Maurine, Shimlock, and Burt Jones.
Thanks. We're very happy to be here.
Thanks for coming. We know you're on the way to the airport and you're moving all around, so thanks for taking the time out and coming in and saying hello.
Well, we want to share with you, just like you guys share with us. And, makes it work good.
Good. We were just talking off camera, and you just mentioned that this is your 50th year in the scuba diving industry.
Well, I wouldn't say industry. I was certified in 1968 to dive. Okay. So, 50 years. This is my 50th anniversary.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
And
I'm old.
not too old. What about? Okay, so you said not in the industry. So you got certified in '68. When did you actually start working or get involved working in the diving industry?
That would be about 1973. I was going to school. I went to college in Mexico. I'm from Texas originally. And I went to college in Mexico, and while we were on spring break, my buddy and mine and I drove down to the Yucatan Peninsula. And we almost drove into the water because the water looked like the sky. And we fell in love with the place, especially myself. And he ended up, together actually, we ended up opening a little dive shop in a little town called Puerto Morelos. Which was the end of the road at that time. You could drive to the area of what was called Isla Mujeres and then down to Puerto Morelos. Puerto Morelos was the only real town on the coast, of the north part of the coast at that time. The road ended there. And
perfect place to put up a shop. All right. Right here.
And that was also where the ferry went to Cozumel. And our intention was to go down and go diving in Cozumel. And we got there, and the ferry was full. We were going to take our car across. The ferry was full, so we decided to camp for a couple of days before we went over to Cozumel. So we went down the beach and threw up a tent and snorkeled offshore. And we never made it to Cozumel.
That good.
It was that good. There was a lobster in every hole. The conch were so thick you'd stub your toe on them, and wading in the beach.
Isla Mujeres is not the place where we have the whale sharks.
It is.
Yes,
but at
of course
time,
they were there, but
they were there back then.
No, well, yes, they were there, I'm sure, but we never knew.
Amazing.
That's also where those bait balls are. And
all
that.
Yeah,
and
we never
knew. There was already a sport fishing industry, but nobody was in the water.
We didn't need it. If we'd known, we would have gone. But everything was so beautiful close by, like all the places now that are so crowded and people have to pay Shell-Ha and Oxcar. That was our playground.
Wow.
So we didn't go very far. We just drove down the road.
I mean, Cancun Beach, we would run naked on that beach.
Yeah.
There wasn't anybody there.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was about 73 that we opened the dive shop there.
Okay.
We were the first dive shop along that coast. And mainly we catered to spear fishermen.
Right. Yeah, well, the 70s. That's what everybody
and
was
we
doing.
did a lot of our early work there. We scuba dived, obviously, but we spent a lot of time free diving.
Okay.
And we never speared fish on scuba. We always did that on breath hold. But that's when we first started. Was 73 was when I actually got into the tourism.
Yeah, in the industry.
Right. Industry.
Okay.
So.
And how long were you guys in Mexico?
Well, I again started there. I started school there in 71 and started the dive shop in 73. I met Maurine in 76, and she moved in with me basically shortly after, 6-8 months after. She was working on her PhD and blew it off.
I had to tell everything.
And
it was the right decision.
Yeah.
So we were there until 88.
Okay.
So we were there. Things grew. We ended up with a second dive shop. We built a series of apartments and then a house and sort of had a B&B and got real involved with the scientific community. A lot of our clients work with the Smithsonian because we were one of the only places on the coast that had really decent accommodations in those early years. And so that's really got us involved not only in the water and being out there with the fish, but actually understanding and learning about, the science behind it.
And we started cave diving also.
Okay, so you're doing the
cave diving
cenotes then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we were some of the very first people in
the
the
early
cenotes
80s.
in the
Wow.
early
Yeah.
80s.
And they're very popular now.
Oh,
Yeah.
hugely popular.
I can't even
Well,
imagine.
places where now you can just drive up, park in the parking lot, and have a cold beer after your dive, we would have to schlep through the jungle.
Yeah.
Many times with burros carrying our gear to get to the cenotes that now are very popular and have paid parking lots beside them.
Yeah. Much more civilized. shall we
And
say.
we were it was very interesting. We were part of a project that ended up at the time, we were in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest explored underwater cave system.
Oh, okay.
It was called Nahochna-Cheech, and that has been gobbled up since by a bigger system, which is part of the Shellhot system. I can't remember the name of it right now. It's been too long. But we spent a lot of time in the jungle. We had remote jungle camps. We'd live out in the jungle as we pushed the cave further and further inland.
Okay, so it was a whole expedition
Yeah,
style
but we
for...
were not leading the expedition.
We did not lead
Right.
the expeditions. We were the photographers of
Okay.
record for
Yep.
the expedition.
And kind of hosting it at the same time.
Right. There was other people that were actually doing more of the exploration. We would follow along behind them and
Yeah.
document them as they would return from a place, and we'd go in with them, photograph the place,
Yeah.
but it was quite an exciting time. I mean,
Yeah.
we were out in the jungle. There were jaguars and tapirs
Yeah.
coming through camp, and
Nice.
it was amazing.
Nothing like
It was
that now.
amazing.
What does it look like today? Have you been back recently?
Probably more like Disneyland. I don't know, but you should.
Yeah, more like
You
Disneyland.
shouldn't mention Mike's name.
No.
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
Okay, you
mentioned.
should.
Yes. Actually, that project was run by a guy named Mike Madden, who's still in the industry, still does a lot of cave diving.
Okay.
And he did a lot of the exploration down there. I don't know. I hear there's a lot of snorkeling in the cenotes and diving and cavern diving where you don't leave the light source. Anybody that's
Right.
certified can do that.
Yep.
So, it's become part of the tourist industry.
Yeah, you
down
see
there.
a lot of
it's a
stuff.
huge part of the industry. And the reason we started doing that is because the prime time for tourism was also the time that we had onshore winds.
Ah,
So we couldn't
okay.
go
Quite
dive.
often it was hard for us to get out
Right.
to the reef, so we started taking people to the cenotes, just snorkeling
Yeah,
first, and
right.
then just
Well, just
diving in the caverns. And then we got certified, and as cave divers, that was the best diving course I ever took, was a cave certification. And then we eventually became cavern instructors. We
Right.
never pushed it on to the cave, because by that point we were beginning to move away from the Yucatan and went to the South Pacific. That was in '88.
88. So did you sell out everything at that time and just
We
completely
sold it all and
gone?
walked away.
Okay, nice.
We've jumped off the bridge a few times.
I understand that. And so, as you say, you went to South Pacific. So was that where was
That
the
was
first place you went?
In 87, we were beginning to look at the coast and the development there, and realized that we either had to get more invested or move on. And our sort of goal in this whole thing has always been the adventure.
Right.
And we wanted more adventure, and we wanted to see the South Pacific. We'd never, done that. And actually, by then we had. But so in 87, 88, we sold our place, went to DEMA, our first DEMA, and got a job managing the first liveaboard in the Solomon Islands, which is called the Billy Kiki. And
Which
it's
is still around today.
It's still around. And we were actually part of doing the refit. When we first saw the boat, it had a 30-degree list.
Oh.
It had table corals on it as big as this table, about
Wow.
three
It
and a
had
half,
just-
4
it
feet
had been
in
sitting in
diameter.
a harbor somewhere forever.
It'd been sitting for 11 years.
Whoa.
Wow.
And it was interesting
But
because
it
the
had
guy.
had a new engine that had good,
It was interesting. The guys that put the operation together bought the boat because it had a brand new engine sitting in the crate on the deck. That had been there for 11 years.
You're kidding.
And the guy bought the motor.
Yeah.
And they said, you can have the boat.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
So about 3 months, and they completely transformed that thing.
Yeah.
And there was two partners. One did the diving ops, and the other guy had a small shipyard there in the Solomons. So he had the crew. We had about 80 people working on that boat for 3 months, and we were laying the carpet on the deck when the first group arrived. We had no clue where we were going to dive. It was all exploratory.
I'm sure this sounds familiar to you.
I was going to say, still sounds like the diving industry today. Oh, we're just putting in this carpet. Welcome.
Welcome, right. It was pretty funny. We had the week before, we kept asking one of the owners, when are we going to get the cook? When is the cook coming on the boat? He said, oh, he's coming. Well, finally, the day the cook arrives, this little kid gets off the airplane.
He was a teenager.
He was a teenager.
Yeah.
And he says, hi, I'm the chef's assistant. I'm come to be the chef on the boat. And Maurine and I both rolled our eyes, but we had so much going on, we didn't think too much about it. So in the beginning, and this is a valuable lesson we learned. In the beginning, especially the first couple of days, Maurine and I were trying to figure out where to dive. I was trying to do the diving. She was in the kitchen because this guy was a teenager.
Right.
We had no clue that he knew how to do anything other than chop vegetables. And about day 3, Maurine was completely exhausted from dealing with the meals. And the guy's name was Marlin. And she said, Marlin, I don't care what you serve for dinner, but I'm not walking in the kitchen until it's time
diving.
for dinner. I'm going diving.
Right.
I'm going diving. I'd had it.
So we come back to the boat after the last dive of the day, and God, there's tremendous smells coming out of the kitchen. We didn't even go in. So the first course comes out, and it's a beautiful pumpkin soup, and he's carved the pumpkin with a fish on it.
Nice.
Right? And then the next course is lobster thermidor. And we're going, what in the heck,
Yeah.
And we said, Marlin, why didn't you tell us that you could cook? And he said, well, you never asked.
See?
I'm sure you've been there before.
Oh,
also.
yes, very much so.
Yep.
Another interesting story there that helped us understand how this thing work. One of the compressors burned up, and we asked the engineer, I said, did you check we told him what to do,
Right.
check the oil, blah, blah, blah. Did you check the oil? Yes. Was it low? Yes. Did you put any in? You didn't tell me to.
Yeah. Okay.
Ouch. So from one side
you gotta
good,
follow
the
it to the
yeah.
end. You don't stop in the middle.
Exactly.
It was valuable lessons we learned in those days that have served us well.
Yeah, because, I mean, if you're the first operation in there, and from the stories I hear about Solomon's even today, you still have to go and stop at every village and
Right.
ask the chief. And I know from doing different things here in the Forgotten Islands and Papua, the local people can be very protective of their certain
Because it
area.
belongs to them.
Exactly.
In the Melanesian culture,
Right.
they own the reef, the water, the air between the reef and the village. And a lot of times, I mean, there's no dispute on our part that it belongs to them, but there's a dispute on their part as to exactly who it belongs to, because there may be many grandfathers that beget many children that all have a claim, and so that's sort of the difficult part, is working that out.
We would go to a new area and go to the village and ask for permission, get permission, maybe pay a little token amount, go diving, come up, and we'd come up and there'd be a canoe up there.
Okay.
And there'd be a guy with a spear, and he'd be, what are you doing? Right?
In a different language.
Wait, we got permission from the chief. He said, that wasn't the real chief. I'm the real chief.
Right.
So we learned that too. You got to really make sure that you've got permission from the top guy.
Because it's still today, it's still like
it's
that.
still that way. And constant. I mean, there are areas in the Solomons today that we had permission to dive that now the boat can't dive.
Oh.
And that changes. It sort of morphs over time.
Yeah, they dive places we couldn't dive. But I mean, you found the same thing, I'm sure, in in Papua.
You know,
right?
Papua was the same thing. When we first started diving there in Raja, we definitely had to get permission from the villages before we went in.
I mean, as it should be.
Yeah,
It
of course,
is
yeah.
theirs.
Right.
It's there.
Come in, check in, say hello, hi guys.
Because their concept is not so much of leisure time, meaning taking a vacation. So they're very curious about us and our culture and why we came to visit them and what we're doing there. And it only makes sense to, communicate,
Absolutely.
right? Share.
What finally broke the ice, we had this one chief that decided to take a chance on us. But he still was, they had no clue why someone would come all the way around the world.
Well, I mean, he had traveled. He had been to Australia and a few places. So he wasn't he was sophisticated in that world.
But they still couldn't, they thought we had to be coming to take something. And they knew we weren't taking fish, so they figured, well, maybe they're taking the shells, because there's a lot of shells in the Solomons that are quite valuable. So what we ended up doing is we got the chief to come on the boat for a trip. And he was right there on the deck every day as the divers went in the water. And as they came out of the water, we had an E6 processor on the boat, and he would see us develop the pictures.
He saw how happy people were.
Right.
And, how exhilarated they were when they would come back, and he thought that was really cool.
Nice.
And so that broke the ice. And he eventually, of course, told his other chiefs in the area, hey, these people aren't trying to take anything.
Yeah.
They just want to look, And that's how it all sort of developed. And, one chief, one village at a time.
Right, yeah. And
One
having
area.
him on the boat when you went to the other villages probably also
Helped
helped.
a lot.
Helped
Yeah.
a lot. Yeah.
Big time.
Wasn't a stable situation, but that's how it got started.
Right, yeah,
and worked pretty
well, that was actually a good thing.
one of the features of a Billy Kiki trip, and I think it's one of the things that people enjoy the most, other than the diving, is every stop there's a market, a floating market that comes out to the boat. Well, we were the ones responsible for that. There wasn't much of a market in Honiara. You could get betel nut, you could get pineapple, and you could get green beans, and that was about it. So most of the food that we were serving to the guests were frozen vegetables and stuff that came from Australia and New Zealand. So we had the idea that we would take seeds to the villages and tell the women how to plant them, and told them that we would buy anything they grew. And that's how that whole thing started.
It's actually a smart move, yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
And they still do it now.
So the parts of Indonesia where they come out to the boat and sell, like in Alor, where they come out with their ikat and sell, and the experience of the guests is they really like interacting with local people.
Absolutely.
And don't like, and that's, I think has been a criticism of the liveaboard industry, especially in Raja Ampat, is that there's not enough brought to the local economy.
Community, yeah.
And in that way, if there was more of an exchange, I think that both sides would benefit from that.
Yeah.
Just finish up with the Solomon story before we move on to other parts of the Pacific. This market thing that we created, and I may get a little choked up about this, because it's one of the things that I think is personally, and I know Maurine feels much the same way, the difference we made in the lives of the people is one of the most important things I feel like that we have ever done. So this market thing developed, and by the time we were only there for 2 years, and we moved on and began to do our trips and market our photography and writing stories and whatnot. And of course that grew and grew. And we went back to the Solomons 10 years later. And many of the crew were still on the boat, and as we got on the boat, they said, they know you're coming. They know you're coming. And okay, they know we're coming. And so we go to one of the villages that we had pioneered the diving in and gotten permission that the boat still dived 10 years later and selling their carvings and all that stuff. And we go to the shore, and there's nobody there except for the chief and his 2 sons, which were small kids when we were first there. And in the Solomons, men hold hands.
Okay.
So we were, very much embraced
Yeah.
and taken into the village. And they had completely tricked out the village. It was decorated and
Lots of flowers.
Lots of flowers. And the children, who were, of course, weren't born when we were there,
Right.
were coming up to us and touching us. We had made such a difference in their lives that they had deified us, and we had become part of their folk history.
Right.
We had no clue that this had happened. And I still feel really good.
Yeah. Because but with, I guess, getting the food in there and
We made a
improving their
huge
diet
difference.
and bringing the money in from that.
We made a huge difference in the lives of many, many people.
Yeah.
And we had no clue. That was not our intention necessarily.
Right.
And we had no clue that had happened. And then when
We were
found
just
it-
looking for lettuce,
Yeah, exactly.
How we wanted
We're just
it.
trying to make a salad.
And 10 years later to come back and have that.
Yeah.
To have that
amazing.
happen, and it's
You created
It's
a
still-
bridge between also
Right,
two
but
different cultures.
it's possible is the point.
Yeah.
It really is possible. Maybe some people might say those were more innocent times, and indeed they were. Definitely more innocent. But I think it's still possible.
Oh, for sure it is. There's different liveaboards
Sure.
here that, sort of take an interest in a particular village along
Right.
their route and really help out,
yeah, exactly.
bringing things every time they go.
You know, there's no way that the villages are going to protect the reefs unless there's some benefit to them.
Right.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
that's just the way that works.
Right.
And you can't expect it to be any different.
No,
you know.
of course.
That's the only thing they have, you
Yeah.
know. And you have to respect that. In the Solomons there, I don't believe until Maurine and I got there that most of those people had ever had a positive experience with a foreigner.
Okay.
You think about what happened.
Yeah.
The war was huge there,
Yeah.
tore the place up.
Sure did.
Before that, the missionaries came in and told them that their culture wasn't viable. So everything that happened to them from foreigners was something that changed their life, and not necessarily in a positive way. And I think Maurine and I were, in many ways, some of the first people that they actually trusted.
Yeah.
And that
And
was a
gave
great
something
thing.
back
And
as
gave
well as
something
just
back.
take, instead of just take.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
So
That's a great
it was a
story.
wonderful
Yeah,
experience.
yeah. And you've been back recently as well, have you?
Oh, we were there last year. Was it last year on your birthday? 16, 2 years ago.
Okay, and still, I guess they don't necessarily
Not
remember
so
you,
much.
but
Only
yeah.
well, I mean,
Some
the
of the
one
older
village
folks,
that
yeah,
we
still
went
do.
to
Oh,
is
that's
where
great.
they do the best quote unquote carvings. They're extremely creative there. They remembered us because
Okay.
we had stopped there and bought carvings, and that was. Oof. And I even. The man who came on the boat and carved actually had passed away, but we went by his village and they remembered us.
Yeah,
so.
his
good.
sons remember.
Yes, cool. Very cool.
Yeah, when we left there, they threw a 2-day party. It was
I'm
great.
not sure what that was about. No, but the villages are still a beautiful, pristine, very clean. The Solomons are great.
Yeah,
Really.
still
Yeah, it's a
very much
wonderful
on top of the list to go to.
Wonderful place.
Yeah, you would like it. You're out there, way out there, and there's no other livable boards. There may be, one or two, but it's
Yeah,
pretty
it's
nice.
still, you're pretty much out there by yourself all
Right.
the time, and it's a clean country. It probably more has to do with the fact that it's impoverished.
So they don't
but-
have a lot of packaged goods.
Right. Yeah.
So
Mhm.
there's not a lot of plastic
No,
around or on
right.
the beaches or anything,
Okay.
which is a problem we have here. So.
Right. And so that was when you left. You did 2 years on the Billy
So
Kiki.
that
and
was
then
in 90.
1990,
We
okay.
left.
Yep.
We moved back to the States and set up our photography dive travel business.
Okay.
And that was when Secret Sea Visions was born, if
Yep.
you will, in 1990. And we started selling photography. Of course, we knew we did have a method in our madness of going to the Solomon Islands because we knew we wanted to be photographers. I mean, we wanted to make our living roaming the world, taking pictures. And we knew in order to do that, we had to have something special.
Right.
And because nobody had ever been to the Solomons, we
Cornered the
contact
market.
Skin Diver magazine saying, hey, we've got an article from a place that you've never, dived. And it was an instant sell, right? So it worked well for us on that level. And so people wanted to start traveling with us. And we took a couple of groups back to the Solomons. But then we heard about a place in Borneo called Sepadan Island. And I believe I think we arrived there January 1st, 1990.
Okay.
There was one resort on the island at the time, and that was operated by a company called Borneo Divers.
Still there.
They're still around. There's no resorts on the island anymore, but they're still around. It was tents at the time, and they did 2 boat dives a day. And I think Maurine and I went out on the boats in the week we were there, that first week, 3 times maybe?
Not very many.
Because it was 3 fin kicks from the beach to the 3,000-foot drop-off.
Right.
Wow.
And there really wasn't any reason to go anywhere else because the huge school of jacks and the huge school of barracuda.
And turtles and turtles and turtles
And
and
turtles were everywhere.
And
Sharks.
Nobody and
Sharks.
sharks and no one else out there. I mean, it was pretty wild.
That's where we
place.
saw our first big school of hammerheads and all that
Okay.
stuff.
They had
you
them
know?
there as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, of course you had to go deeper, just like we do here.
Yeah.
But so we started taking people to Sepadan a great deal, and
Adventurous people that like to sleep in tents.
The next year they built these little huts.
Okay.
But we used to stay in adventurous type places along the way, and people really got to know Borneo, and they got to know Malaysia, and they loved it. They really did. The traveling was actually pretty smooth considering when it was and
Yeah.
how it worked. It did. It was quite well received.
so I guess that was about 92. We were on our way. We had already, in 92, Borneo Divers had decided to open up another resort in Indonesia now, just down the Borneo coast, but across the border, in a place called Sangalaki, which I know you've heard of. I
Yep.
don't know how much the audience has heard of Sangalaki, but we went down there in 92 to see about the viability of turning that into a destination, and Borneo Divers eventually built a resort there. On our way out to Sepadan in 92 with the group, it was really rough, and the boats were pounding, and there was this guy on the boats with us that was going to the resort, sort of a crusty looking dude, and he and I were the only 2 people standing up, holding on to the rail
I
above.
do believe I was standing up. I get seasick. I do definitely believe I was standing up.
And we were, of course, taking the pounding on
Right.
with our knees instead of on our backs. So got to talking to this guy, and turned out his name is Cal Muller. Do you either one
I've
of you
not
are
met him, but
familiar
I
with
know
Cal?
him. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know of him.
Well, Cal, he had just finished a book called Underwater Indonesia. It was the first book written about diving in Indonesia. And at that point, Sepadan was still contested by Malaysia, the Philippines, and Indonesia. And the World Court eventually sorted it out, and it became Malaysian. So we got to talking, and he was there he was working on an edit for the second edition of the book, which I believe came out in 91, his first book, and this is 92. So he was up there working on, extending and editing the book and finding new places. So we got to talking, and we had a lot of history in common. And he'd spent a lot of time in Mexico, as we had. So we sort of became instant friends. And we knew the dive site so well and knew the operation so well that they basically gave Maurine, I, and Cal our own boat, and we showed Cal around.
It was fun.
And Cal, the Wonder Water Indonesia book was about his 20th book. He's a travel writer, and he had written for Periplus Publishing. He'd written a number of guidebooks on different regions of Indonesia.
He traveled all over Indonesia backpacking, staying in homestays, Losman, just hanging out, and he spoke the language quite well. He'd basically been everywhere and written guidebooks everywhere.
Okay.
So we were fascinated.
And diving was new for him, and he loved it.
Right.
He really loved it, yeah.
So we ended up talking. He said, hey, next year I'm putting together this little exploratory trip. He said, I have part of a little business called Grand Komodo Tours. He says, we have 3 or 4 boats that take people from Sumbawa, Sape, through the park and drop them off in Labuan Bajo. That was sort of a backpacker's route, and back the other direction. And they'd stop at what we now call Pink Beach and snorkel. Mm-hmm. And Cal had this idea that, well, maybe
there's diving in Komodo.
Maybe there's diving there. Maybe we should look around.
Right.
Maybe we could actually turn one of these boats into a little liveaboard.
Because he had really gotten into diving, and he wanted to have a diving business.
So he invited us to join this expedition to go to Komodo to see if it was worth developing as a destination. I think everybody watching this probably knows what the results of that were.
It probably worked.
It was, but it was a seminal trip because that's where we met Jerry Allen. He was on the trip. And Roger Steen.
And Roger Steen.
Okay.
He was on the trip, and several other people that,
And we became lifelong friends with
all of them,
with all of them.
That was really cool. And then from Jerry, we started learning about the scientific aspects, and that's, totally changed how we dive, why we dive.
You're right.
And how we look at the
pictures
reef, right?
and how you look at the reef.
We started looking at it.
Of.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We started looking at it as an integrated world instead of a world with a bunch of separate things. But on that trip, of course, we did determine that Komodo was worth developing, and we went all over the park, and we pulled into what we now call Horseshoe Bay.
Oh, wow.
So you did that even on the first trip you were in there, okay.
This was 93. We pulled into the bay from the west, and as you know, it's a horseshoe-shaped bay with a little island sort of stuck in the middle of it called Nusa Kode. And so we pulled in, we got out of the weather, it was nice and protected in there, and we dove on the west side of the horseshoe, and it wasn't very good. We dove on the main island, on the island of Rincha, but it was just sort of an algae bottom, and there was some few interesting things, but nothing to write home about. So we moved on, looking for an anchorage. We moved on around to the middle part of the bay, and there, just to the right of the dive site, which we didn't know about, there was a beach, and we pulled up to that beach to anchor, and there was a big dragon on the beach. Mm-hmm. So we all wanted to see the dragon, right? So we all jump in the boat.
This was way before when that was like a unique and exciting thing to see a dragon on the beach.
And of course, the dragon ran from us. That doesn't happen
No.
today. But instead of running to you, it ran away from us. So it runs down the beach, and so we're following it, hoping it'll stop, And so it climbs up on this rock right there, right on the beach. And so we follow it up the rock, and we get to the top, and it's right there on the top, and it's eating a juvenile dragon, Komodo dragon. Right? So we got a bunch of pictures and whatnot, and we're looking out, and at the base of this rock, we see this reef sticking out that we didn't know was there, and we fortunately had come around
Missed it with the boat.
And we said, hey, we should try that spot, Let's do that for our next dive. and it was pretty good.
Yeah.
And we ended up naming it Cannibal Rock.
Cannibal Rock.
That's fun.
And it
One of the
ended up
best
determining
that's,
that the whole west side of that bay was extraordinary.
Right.
I mean, that's where you've got the yellow wall, and
Yeah.
which we had different names for.
Right.
Crinoid,
Yeah, back then.
Back
Yeah.
then, it was different names. But we saw those for the first time.
Right.
And the next year, they had turned one of those boats into a liveaboard.
This is still the same Grand Komodo that's
Still
around
the
today?
same Grand
Same
Komodo.
people.
Yeah.
Same
Okay.
people.
Is Cal still? Is
No,
Cal
he's
is-
not involved.
he's
He
not involved in
ended
the
up
company.
working in Papua. Now he's retired and
Oh,
he
okay.
lives in Singapore. Yeah, but he's still Indonesian at heart.
Right. Yeah.
I'd say.
So the first liveaboard. This is a good one. And I think once you hear the end of the story, you'll realize that things aren't quite the same
Right.
as they were then. They had no power on the boat, so we had to put a little generator on the boat to run the compressor and to charge our batteries. And it was stiflingly hot, So we basically all slept on deck. We had there was no water on the boat other than the big barrel that was
Right. That you
strapped
bring in. Yeah.
was strapped to the mast, and so we were rationed 2 little buckets of water a day. So we would have to we'd jump in the ocean, soap up, jump back in the ocean, rinse off, and then we'd come back on deck and we'd use our 2 cups of water to clean ourselves off. The toilet was a hole in the rear deck.
Right. With a little swing or
With
something.
a little swing thing, and there was a little wall built up for your privacy, about 3 feet off the deck, right? So when you were squatting, you could still have a conversation. And so
Funny.
you can,
So not much privacy on back
as
in
you
the
can
days.
see, the liveaboards have changed
Yes.
a bit.
Changed quite a bit, yeah.
Just a bit.
since those
And
days.
Seascape.
in a good way. And then, so when did you start doing, like, when did the liveaboards get to the point in Komodo where you could start leading your own
Well, I
trips?
mean, we took
Or-
people out even on those first
Okay.
boats, believe
Yeah.
it or not.
Oh, there were disclaimers, but people wanted the adventure. Plus, they were basically the only people out there on a boat.
Yeah, I would have signed up
Yeah.
right
Yeah,
away.
by 95, they had actually converted one of the boats, put in a proper generator and compressor. It was interesting, though. They didn't have any refrigeration.
Oh.
So
Yeah.
we would...
Chickens on the top.
Really?
They had a
Oh, that's
chicken coop
hilarious.
on the top of the boat, and we had 1 chicken a day.
Oh, that's funny. At least you got, hey, look, dragons are coming to the boat.
Actually, and I don't know whether you're going to want to put this in here or not, but the feeding of the dragons, and I
That
feel
used
somewhat
to be allowed in
Right.
Komodo, right?
Right.
and I feel somewhat guilty about this because we started something that's in many ways gotten out of hand, and we had no idea that we were starting it. That first trip, we had all the chickens, and I guess this is probably the second trip, and we had a goat with us as well as the chickens. So the last night we had this party and butchered the goat and had a big barbecue, and we said, hey, let's take all the bones and the skin and whatnot and tie it up in a ball and hang it in a tree right over there and see what happens, right? Well, the next morning we had 3 huge dragons on the beach,
Oh,
right?
wow.
Whoa, this is great. So we all got, all these great photographs and whatnot. And I sort of think that that's where this whole thing got started.
Right.
And I do feel guilty, folks, that it's somewhat gotten out of hand, and now it's hard to even walk on those beaches without the dragons coming to you instead of running from you,
Right, exactly.
which would be their natural
Right,
order of
right.
things.
Well, the drag. I mean, I saw last year, even in the Ranger Nature Park, I saw they had a bit of goat tied to a tree somewhere. I was
Really?
like, that's a bit interesting.
Huh, very
I'm surprised
interesting.
about that.
Yeah, me
Yeah,
too.
when we first went there, they actually had a goat feed. I mean, you
Right,
would go on
exactly.
a walk, they would tie a goat up, and
Right.
A bunch of dragons
and a
would
bunch
come.
of dragons would come
And
in.
some people crying and say, "Oh my God, what you
Yeah.
doing to the poor goat?"
Right, and that's the way it is in the wild. So
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's why they stopped it because
Right.
it was cruel and
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
And plus, it was
Pretty
changing
good.
the behavior of the animals. The animals weren't going anywhere. They just wait around to get.
They don't eat that much, so
No.
they don't eat a
Yeah.
goat a day.
Right,
you
right,
know?
right.
So we, for 2 or 3 years, we were running trips there to the Komodo and occasionally back to the Solomons. And we went on a trip on a boat called the Chihili with a fellow Texan named Larry Smith, who is well known to us folks with grayer hair. He was a very important, pivotal person in Indonesian diving. And the boat left. We were going to do a trip through the Banda Sea. And the boat was tied up at a pier in Laha Bay at the end of the airstrip in Ambon. So we get on the boat and we take off. And we go all through, we go to the Snake Islands and go to Banda and do the whole thing down there in the fort.
Yeah.
Nice. And all that stuff. And about day 4 or day 5, Larry says, he said, I've seen this weird fish right under the boat. And he said, it looks like something the cat coughed up. Looks like a fur ball. And I went, boing, that has to be a rhinopeus. Larry hadn't even heard of a rhinopeus, but of course we had books.
Yep.
We go to that page. Does it look like that, Larry? And Larry was just a huge guy that had these jolly little eyes, and that's it. So we decided to cut the trip short by a day and go back to Lahad and to dive under the boat. And we opened deck, and I think I did 7 dives that day. I think some people made up to 9 dives. Every pier piling had at least 1 frogfish on it. I can't tell you how many frogfish we saw. The first flamboyant cuttlefish we had ever seen. The first rhinopeus,
right,
and the second and the third we had ever seen. The fire urchins with the commensal shrimps and crabs and all that. Those were all firsts for all of us, right? Because Larry had only been just under the boat. He hadn't been down the slope.
He was scraping the hull or something.
Right, exactly.
And he noticed things he hadn't ever seen.
Right.
But that was sort of the birth
of critter diving in Indonesia. Now, Bob Halstead had been doing this stuff over in P&G for a few years prior to that.
And there had been some other people diving in Laha, that German woman, Monica?
Yeah.
Anyway.
But anyway, we
so
came
it started
back.
in Ambon,
Yeah.
not in Lembe.
No, then
in Ambon, excuse me.
In Ambon. Then,
Yes, she meant, you meant Ambon.
Yeah, and then then Larry went to Limbo from that boat.
Okay.
He started working in Limbo.
Yeah, that boat that whole operation fell apart, and Larry moved up to Gungungan Bay in Limbe Straits, and of course we followed him. He'd been there about 3 months when we showed up. It was very interesting because prior to going up and spending some time with Larry, we had been in Komodo. I mean, on the same trip.
Yep.
It was a combined trip we took a group to Komodo, and then we went to Limbe on our own. And while we were in Komodo that time, one of the dive masters said, "Hey, come here." And he shows us a pygmy seahorse. He had just found it, and it was, of course, the first one we had ever seen.
Right.
We'd seen pictures of them in a book, but we hadn't put 2 and 2 together yet that they were fan specific, right?
Right.
They lived on only one kind of fan, and there wasn't any reason to look for the bloody things anywhere else but on those fans. So we told Larry about this when we got there. We told him what kind of fan it was and whatnot, and he, of course, knew it. He said, "Oh, there's one at the end of the pier." I said, "Cool." Anyway, I said, maybe there's some pygmies on it. So, but Maurine and I went out on the first dive of the day, and we went to a dive site, I believe they call it Nudie Falls.
Okay, yep.
And we found a fan that had 13 pygmy seahorses on it, and we were so excited. And we go back to tell Larry, we got to do that dive again this afternoon. He says, the fan at the end of the pier, it's got 7 on it. And those were the first one he had ever seen.
So he had gone down.
Right, he had gone down. He was teaching a course that morning, so he wasn't able to accompany us. So we both found the first pygmy seahorses in Limbo
On the same day.
On the same day, but
Oh,
on 2
that's
different
fun.
dive sites.
Wow.
So that was sort of the beginning. That whole Limbo blew up at that point. Larry and Denise Tackett were there. They were working on sponge research. Of course, Denise, they ended up finding another variety of pygmy on a different fan, and that pygmy ended up being named for her.
Right, the Denise
Hippocamma
pygmy. Yeah.
And while we were there, we spent a lot of time there because it was like a Easter egg hunt.
Yeah, right.
And while we were there, we found the first Rhinopeus in Limbo, the first flamboyant cuttlefishes in Limbo, the first ambon scorpion fishes in Limbo. All happened sort of on our watch, which was very, very cool.
What year was this, would you say?
Ooh, from like 95, 96 through 2000-ish.
Yeah, but all that stuff was probably 96, 97.
Yeah, the last half of the 90s. I mean, we have not ever really stopped going to Limbo.
Right.
Yeah,
we're
going this afternoon.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we love it. And it never disappoints.
Were you writing articles about it then too?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons why it blew up.
Actually, I should step back about a year. Our trip with Larry, we were already putting together our first book with the Secret Sea. And mostly the photographs were either from Sapatan or from the Solomon Islands. We hadn't dived that much. There was some from Sangalaki, but we hadn't dived that much. There was a few from Komodo, I guess. But on that trip with Larry, we found our first ghost pipefish and a few things like that. So we sort of stopped the presses, added a bunch of stuff from the Laha Banda Sea trip into the book. And the book came out in 96, and that 96 was when Larry moved to Limbo. So that was 96, and probably the discovery of all these creatures happened in the next couple of years. Because we were back and forth there. We spent 2 or 3 months there at a time.
Still living in Texas at that time.
Still living in Texas at that time. We moved back and forth between Texas and Mexico.
How many rolls did you bring?
That was the hard part, right? Because that was in the days of film, and so we would, hand carry just an incredible.
150, 200. But both of us were shooting.
You have to go to Singapore, have it developed, and then come back and do it again, and then you're worried because it's hot all the time, and it was much more difficult.
I understand.
Back then. How many rolls? I don't know. I guess when we moved from Texas to Washington in 2012, we threw away thousands and thousands and thousands of slides. We just went through it,
kept the best ones. We'd already scanned a bunch of them by that time.
And that was intense.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, those days were trying to convince the inspectors to please hand inspect these films.
Don't put it through the
stuff.
X-ray.
Those were crazy days, trying to keep it cool and all that. So in the late 90s there, we were again continuing to run trips and spreading them out between Komodo and Limbo, and ran another trip or two in the Banda, back to the Solomons and whatnot. So by this point, our travel business as well as our photojournalism business were both blossoming. And this was, of course, before film. And at that point, you could actually make a living on taking pictures.
Yeah, right.
Selling
stock
stories.
photography was
Not just doing articles, but stock.
Yeah, the money was divided by a lot less people than it is now. So that's the issue.
And photographs were worth a lot more at that point. And our agents...
Can we go back to those days?
Right, exactly.
Kill off a few million people that are taking pictures,
So those were heady days. Doing all that, and so by 2000, in 2000 actually, Maurine and I were wondering where we were going to go with all this. The photographs weren't selling that well anymore. Digital had obviously come into play at that point. And we were considering maybe a career change. And we got an opportunity to move back to Mexico. We spent 5 years in Mexico, 2000 to 2005. We went back to Mexico and moved further down the coast, and again built a B&B and worked. We didn't own a dive shop, but we worked with a dive shop, and that was really disappointing from a marine life point of view, because we had already seen what was much better. So by the late 2000s, by the mid 2000s, Maurine and I were actually considering. We weren't really happy with our situation in Mexico, nor the diving, and so we decided that we were going to maybe try to get into a different field. And we had another trip, and we were with Jerry on a trip. I believe we were back in Komodo, and we were telling Jerry that we're not sure where this is going, because we're not being able to make any money off the photography anymore, and the dive travel was doing okay, but it hadn't blossomed as much as it has since then. And Jerry said, I'm working with this guy named Mark Erdman. He said, I'm consulting with Conservation International and TNC, and we're working in this new area out in Papua. It's called Raja Ampat, and we hadn't even heard of Raja Ampat. This was probably 2003 or so.
Okay.
And Jerry said, yeah, it's fantastic. He said, let me see what I can do.
They had done a survey on Pindito with Eddie, who had been out to a lot of areas there, and they did that in 2002, TNT, CI, World Wildlife, and they brought a bunch of scientists out there just to see if the reef was as good as they thought it was.
So
Yes.
in 2004, we went to Raja for the first time on a boat that's now, I guess it was called Sea Safari. It was the people that have Damai at this point.
Yeah.
I believe they had a different name at that before, but we went out. Eddie was a little cheeky. He didn't show us all the really good spots. He showed us some of the good spots, and of course we realized that it was fantastic. And of course the next year we went back and started looking around and found a bunch more. But in the meantime, Jerry had talked to his boss, which is Dr. Mark Erdman, about us, and asked Mark, hey, these people are really good people, and they know a lot, and they've got a lot of connections, not only with tourism, but in publishing. And maybe there's a place for them in this whole project. So we met Mark, and in 2008, Mark hired us as Sustainable Marine Tourism Consultants.
Nice long name.
Yes.
It's a long name, right?
Long name. Basically, it was a dream job.
Yeah.
He, at that point, when it was already starting to be, there was 5 or 6 liveaboards that were going out there, and they were all diving the same dive sites. The itineraries were identical, mirror images of each other. And Mark knew that the place had more than 20 dive sites. And he also knew that the liveaboards would be a very good policing force. Their presence alone would deter illegal fishing. So he hired us basically to promote diving in Raja Ampat, and hired us a boat for a month. We had scooters on the boat, and he said, go find new dive sites and write me a guidebook.
Yes.
Dream job.
Photograph, right, the dream
Yeah.
job.
Dream
right?
job.
What was the title again?
Sustainable Marine Tourism Consultants. And I'll just go back to the dive industry part of it again, is that you need so many skills to survive. It isn't enough to be a good photographer. You have to be intelligent enough to be able to write something analytically, and we were fortunate that we knew someone who was in publishing here, and we knew all the boats, and it sort of all came together in a package. So, diving can't be the most important part of it.
Yes.
Your love of diving, but it has to lead you to other things.
Right.
Yeah, you need to
sure.
diversify. We know
Yes.
that quite well,
Yes.
right, Mike?
Yes, you
We're
do.
doing a
Yeah,
big
I
bunch
mean,
of
You're
things.
here because you love diving, and I mean that's where we met Mike when he was running a liveaboard like we used to do, and now, this is just a natural outgrowth of
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now we even do podcasts.
Yeah. Right, and now we're doing podcasts. So the book came out in 2009,
Diving Raja Ampat.
Diving Raja Ampat, Diving Indonesia's Raja Ampat,
Correct.
and the book sold out in 18 months. And I think many people were surprised that something like that could even be produced here in country, entirely in country. And that was very much our intent. We did not want to take it outside to publish it in Singapore or wherever. We wanted to do it here. So the book did very well, and it became sort of the Bible for the new liveaboards that were coming out. And our contract expired, basically, at the end of 2009. And we were somewhat disappointed, and we were sort of wondering what we were going to do. And we were talking to Mark, and Mark told us, well, look, it's way more than Raja Ampat. He says, you've already been down to Triton Bay. We'd been down to Triton Bay a couple of times already. And he says, there's this other place around the back of the Bird's Head called Cendrawasih Bay. And he said, so we want to like incorporate that whole thing. So why don't you guys do another book?
Yeah, I mean they knew about the whale sharks, but they didn't know about any dive sites.
Oh, so they'd already known about the
Yeah,
bird.
it was
Okay.
vague.
Okay.
People were going out from Namire and that, but there weren't any liveaboards going down there yet, really.
So we knew about the sharks, but we didn't know if there was any diving there. So again, Mark got us a boat, and we spent a month tromping around again, and found a lot of really nice dive sites there. So the intent, of course, was to make that a destination, Cendrawasih, a standalone destination, as well as Triton Bay, a standalone destination. So Mark said, hey, let's do another guidebook. And that became, in 2011, that book was published, and that was Diving Indonesia's Bird's Head Seascape. Mm-hmm. And we try to always include the Bird's Head Seascape name when we speak of Raja Ampat, because not that many people actually know that the whole thing is a unit. And so the book came out that way, and then we've had a little problem, I think, over the years. That's changing now, of course, because we're far enough down the line. What the Bird's Head is. What's the Bird's Head? Whoa, it's part of Raja Ampat. Oh, Raja Ampat. And everybody had heard of Raja Ampat.
Yeah, they sure have.
But not that many people had heard about Triton or Cendrawasih.
But that's changing a lot.
Yeah.
So that book came out in 2011. And our contract expired early the next year. And Mark said, well, let's do another book. There's so much more information. There's so many more dive sites. And a lot of people had given us dive sites,
Right.
knew that we were doing this, and including yourself. And thank you very much. And so I said, Mark, it doesn't make sense to keep publishing books. Let's do a website so that we can constantly update it. And he was sort of thinking along the same lines, because there had been so much scientific research done. And he wanted, there was papers and documents and briefs and surveys and all over the place, It was some here, some there. And anybody trying to do research on the area had to spend an exhaustive amount of time just trying to track down where various bits of info lived. And Mark said, I want a library on this site where we can put every single document that's ever been done in the region, every survey that's ever been done, every fish that's ever been
Identified.
Yeah.
And so the website, when you first look at the website, it looks sort of like a tourism website. It's certainly photo generated. But when you really start to peel back the layers of the website, you will find that there's a tremendous amount of information there. And the library, despite the fact that I don't think that many divers necessarily use the library, a tremendous amount of scientific and journalistic people use the dive site
Yeah,
because of the library.
Right.
People, Indonesians studying marine biology, there's a lot of Bahasa articles on there for them to look at. And
That's great.
they look at the species descriptions that scientists have done from all over the world and climate reports and all of that. So it helps a lot of advanced students because it's all in one place.
Right, yeah. It's a portal for
Yeah.
So
loads of
anybody
everything,
can
yeah.
look at it.
Right.
I mean, there's a few articles that are password protected, but write the administrator. I can get you.
He'll probably get you a password.
We've got. I keep go. I go on there quite often still, looking at doing. It's like, where's that? Let me see if they got it on there.
Yeah.
And so-
Yeah, and of course all the dive maps are there, and we keep
Yep.
those up to date. When we get new dive sites, we
Right.
put them on there, and it's completely transparent. Nobody's
Right.
trying to hide anything. There's
Yeah.
GPSs, dive directions. Anybody can go on the site and get all that information.
Yeah, it's good.
And we invite you to share your photos and your journey and your trip with us. We quite often publish articles by people that have just traveled there.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And photographs and all that
and
stuff.
photographs.
We've
So-
been in there a couple of times.
Yeah.
Once
Yeah.
with the Mola Mola, that
Yeah.
first recorded Mola Mola over there.
Yep. And we have there's probably a lot more of the underwater tribe stuff on the site than you even realize because I'm constantly cannibalizing.
You see?
Well, I mean, you gave me permission. And,
Yeah, but I
you're,
mean,
you're
no,
always credited.
Yeah,
shares
no.
it with, over
It's-
social media.
Yeah.
With
It
lot of
serves a
different
great
people.
cause, so
Yeah,
we are happy
exactly.
to
Yeah,
contribute.
exactly.
Yeah.
And now I administer, not only do I administer and am responsible, or we are administer and are responsible for the site, we also do the social media that's involved with that. And so you can, there's a Facebook page.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
And
We're
you
always
can go
on
there, and every time we publish a new article, we'll make an announcement on the Facebook
Okay.
page, so you know that it's constantly being updated. And we usually the site usually updates about once a week.
Okay. Well,
Depending
we're
on-
going to put the links on the screen here, so people that are watching
Right.
they can click
And,
on. it.
and again, like I said, we encourage people to contribute.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. It's a
Yep.
community. That's what the site's about. So,
Good.
so we're still doing that.
Still doing that.
Still doing that.
And you're still doing so. Right now, you're on your way to Limbo. You're doing that, and then from Limbo, you're going to.
We'll be back here one night, and then we fly to Bima.
Okay.
And we'll be doing Komodo National Park.
Komodo trip.
Yep.
Yep.
And then you have any other trips coming up? Because you've got that. This
We have
July.
a gap for
July.
a while.
We have a bit of a gap.
Yep.
So we need to take a little break. Gap.
Travel is becoming, especially for our our age and our demographic, the people that travel with us, becoming increasingly difficult. And we're, of course, getting a little longer in the tooth ourselves. And we're planning to scale back somewhat,
Okay.
not run near as many trips.
Yeah. We've been doing it. We've been taking safaris to Africa, and that's been outrageous.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we have another one of those next year. Snorkeling with humpback whales next year, and then
Wow.
a few trips back here in 2020. But we've slowed it down a bit. Definitely slowed it down a bit.
And of course, it's not just Indonesia. I mean, we take people back to the Solomons. We run trips to Fiji, run trips to PNG,
Yep.
the Cocos off of, the Americas, off of Central America in Costa Rica. So we run trips all over the place, but our hearts lie in Indonesia,
Yep.
and especially, but somewhat, I think I want my ashes scattered in Komodo.
Down on Cannibal Rock.
Down on
area.
Cannibal
Yeah.
And then
Rock,
Cannibal
yeah.
Rock.
So you might have to do that.
I'm not getting on the beach there.
Right. No, you don't have to go on the beach.
Only on the rock.
Yeah.
And you were just saying because with the African safari, it just I guess gets to a point where carrying all the equipment that you need for a scuba diving trip, it's such an equipment intensive. It must actually be a relief to go to a place like Africa where you only need a few lenses.
And you can't
The
take
boat's
a lot.
not moving.
No.
Right.
You can't take a lot of stuff when you on those very small aircraft.
Right.
Yeah, so everybody has about a 15-kilo limit, and one carry-on.
Yeah.
And really, you need a long zoom lens.
And that's
That'll
it.
Do it.
That just about does
That
it.
just about does
And
it.
we're actually in 2020, we're starting next year with Tonga. We're going to be running some snorkeling trips as
Okay.
well.
Big
Yeah.
market in snorkeler.
Yes.
Big
I
market.
mean, you mentioned, and I believe you said Ethan Daniels will be the next live podcast. Ethan's been doing snorkeling trips for a long time.
Long time.
He, in many ways, pioneered the snorkeling dynamic in Raja Ampat, and so we're following his shoes in some ways. And we're looking forward to that. It'll be sharing with a whole group, a whole demographic that we never had access to
Yeah,
before,
right,
or
yeah.
had access to us. So
Yep.
we're looking forward to doing that.
And again, much less intensive.
Yeah, we
equipment
won't
intensive.
have to. It's one of the worst things, of course, is dealing with the overweight.
Yeah.
And checking in at the
Right.
domestic flights, and not only in Indonesia but in other countries like PNG, the same issue there. You fly into a central city and then you've got to get on a small plane, and there's always logistical issues with that, and all that stuff is, we've done it for 40 years now, and it's time for the tribe to take over.
That's exactly what we're doing. Exactly
Yeah,
what
we're getting
doing.
a camping trailer, going to cruise all over the
Nice.
U.S. and we just want to be out in nature and
Yeah.
want to explore different aspects.
We
of it.
like
So,
wild.
Yeah, we like
And
wild.
we like being surrounded by wild. That's one of the reasons we moved where we did, because very little population. There's never a traffic jam.
But it's got all it's still got all the comforts of home,
Yeah.
which is nice.
Right.
Exactly.
Comforts of home, and within an hour's drive, we can be at a tide pool or a mile high in the mountains.
Yeah.
Trekking up there or at a waterfall.
Yeah.
So
And still
we're having a good
keeping
time, and
really
it's still
active.
new to us because we're both from the South. Maureen from South Carolina. Originally, I'm from Texas, and I left Texas and moved south and lived in the tropics basically my entire adult life. And it's quite a change to be in the Pacific North in a temperate area.
Yeah, with a lot more rain.
With a lot more rain. Actually, it's funny, and I
We
probably
don't have very much.
I probably shouldn't say this, but Squim is in a rain shadow. It's in a blue hole, and we get less than 16 inches of rain a year
Wow.
in Squim, which
like
is
half of what we used to get in Texas, which
Yeah.
was like in a
which is
drought
what,
area,
30,
right?
Okay.
30, 40
It's pretty
centimeters or
amazing.
something. Not that
It
much.
doesn't rain that much.
And
We won't put that in. Don't,
Yeah.
everybody will
Don't
want
put
to
that in.
move.
Well,
Let's move there.
yeah, there's the question: what are you going to do if you move there, right? I mean, you still have to go out and travel, so there you go.
And so we've obviously we've started photographing a great deal.
It's beautiful,
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
gorgeous.
exactly.
So,
And
yeah.
and to be honest, I mean, there was a time in our career that marine photographs sold very well, and we made a good living off of just selling photography and stories. And that went away with the advent of digital. And we still sell. I mean, we've got agents. I mean, Getty is one of our
Okay.
agents, and we're still photographing all the time, and our agents market that work. And if you look at our sales reports, we sell more topside images
Okay.
than we do underwater.
So you are actually actively putting
Pursuing
in new
that.
topside
Yeah.
stuff into your agents. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
for
exactly.
Yeah, it's something you can always do.
And
Yeah,
underwater,
right,
also.
exactly. We can do that, and eventually, even when we can't hardly drive, we can
Yeah,
still do
yeah,
that.
yeah.
We can do it on off
Question
of
is,
our bicycles.
will it be in focus?
Right.
So when you really look at our careers, we've worn a number of hats
Yeah.
through
Right.
these. I mean, we've started out as just being sort of adventurous divers, and then owning a little dive shop, and then we became instructors, and we're highly rated instructors. We're not just the entry level.
Right.
We can teach the course directors kind of stuff. We're not course directors, but I don't even know what Patty calls it.
I don't know if they have anymore.
Staff instructor.
Staff
or something.
instructors,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
believe that's what
Right.
it's called. And so that, and then we became liveaboard managers, tour guides. That evolved into a big travel business, and our travel business still
Yeah.
does very well.
It's good.
And now with conservation. So
Yeah.
we've sort of evolved as time has gone by, and as economics have changed. We've been fortunate to sort of see the curve and sort of stay ahead of the
exactly.
wave, right?
And it all started from throwing a tent on a beach at the end of the road in Mexico.
In Mexico.
There you go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good place to end.
Yeah. Well, I think that is actually a good place to end. So we've fantastic podcast, guys. Thank you for coming out and giving all that basically the story, the career, and all the different circles that it has done, which is fantastic.
Very entertaining.
We really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
And it's nice to share that with you and with you.
Yeah, it's all. I think for a lot of people out there, it'll be new.
Yeah,
It's a
well,
lot of stuff I didn't know
and
either.
give them a bit of an idea of how all of this actually gets done.
Yeah, exactly.
Because a dive destination does not just pop up.
No.
It's created.
Exactly.
And Maurine calls us destination developers.
There you go.
One of the things we do anyway. So thank you all.
Thank
And
you very
thank
much.
you. That's it for this episode of the Underwater Tribe podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, please give it a like down there on the YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on Facebook. And we'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.